Product success metric interviews are now a part of more than 50% of product management interview processes. So if you want to land a product management job this year, you have to master this product interview question. In today's video, we're going to walk through an A+ example from a former Google product manager so that you can see the structure, the steps, and ultimately how to deliver a great product success metrics interview. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it. Mark, how would you measure the success of GPT-5?
Okay, GPT-5. Super interesting question. Actually, a couple quick clarifying questions. Am I responsible for all of GPT-5? I mean, that's a pretty big product.
Let's assume that, the OpenAI product team, it's actually surprisingly lean. Like 90% of the company is researchers and engineers. So they do have, CPO Kevin Weil. You're reporting up to him. He has a pretty flat org of like 20 PMs. And yeah, you're responsible for the GPT-5 rollout because they're releasing a model almost every 3 months. They have a PM on each one.
Okay, all right, cool. So let's go there. We'll go pretty broad-based. So the way I'm going to approach this problem, classic analytics problem, the way I'm going to talk about this problem is one, talk about OpenAI, what their mission is, and how GPT-5 might roll up into this mission. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some product goals. What are we going to try and do with GPT-5, and how is it related to the mission? Give it some context. Then what I'm going to do is take a look at the product. I'm going to really break it down in terms of who the stakeholders are, what are the actions they take, what are the key metrics that they take. I'll spend a little bit of time here, and then finally, what I'll end up with is I'll end up with a North Star, which is what's really, really important to target to. And then we'll also talk about some things like some counter metrics and downstream metrics as well. And we can also do some trade-off questions at the end if we want to. Okay, sound good so far?
Love it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's start with actually the mission of OpenAI and what's important. So the mission of OpenAI is to ensure that artificial intelligence benefits all of humanity. This is a really, really, really big mission. And so when we think about ChatGPT, right, this is really the face of the company. This is how people interact with the company. This is their exposure to the company. And they've had a number of models in the past. I think they started with 1, 2. I think when they got to 3 is when it got interesting. And then 3 and 3.5 and 4 and 4.5 and 5 is their latest hallmark. So obviously this is a big face of the company, and it's super, super important. Also, I want to say the use cases that is going on is, well, we'll get into use cases, but we'll just say it's used by consumers, professional users, companies, governments probably now at this point, right? So a lot of people are using ChatGPT-5. I think it's actually the most downloaded app on the App Store in general.
Yep.
So as we kind of drill into the importance, and we can see why this is important to OpenAI, let's create a little bit of a mission for ChatGPT-5. And I think it's going to be an extension of the mission of products before it, but I think it's to make AI accessible and useful and aligned to everyday problem solving. Of course, that means very different things to different people, but it helps with creativity and productivity. So again, we want to make AI accessible and useful. Sounds a little like Google in a way, but anyways, let's go on. Okay, so now we've got this broad goal. I want to break that down a little bit because when I think about OpenAI, I think there's going to be 4 kind of sub goals underneath this. So on the sub goals, one is that as a brand, we're trying to acquire more and more users to try GPT, to use GPT. So I think goal number 1 is, or sub goal number 1 is acquisition. Sub goal number 2 is for all these new users using ChatGPT, and all of our existing users who are on 3, 4, and 5, we want them to upgrade, or 3 and 4 to upgrade to 5. We want them to use the product. We want people to use this on a regular, habitual basis, and we want to demonstrate really strong engagement. And then there's a couple of other layers here that I think are important to ChatGPT specifically, or OpenAI specifically. So one is around quality, right? So this is about AI, right? This is about making AI useful and accessible. And so it's got to work. The first versions of it worked pretty well, but I think they inspired people. But people had problems with hallucinations and things like that. And so we're going to continue to invest in quality in our roadmap to get to AGI. And the last piece we want to take a look at is probably some layer of monetization.
What you should notice here is how quickly Mark came to a framework that he could use to guide the rest of the conversation. This is really important in case interviews.
It's a very different model than a Google. Google's model is spend more time on site, click on blue links, make money. ChatGPT is more of a subscription model, so it's more about jobs to be done, and it's really about helping you do your task and getting people to upgrade to their models and pay them subscription revenue. And I believe actually subscription revenue is the number one driver of revenue at OpenAI right now. So I think this is a really important layer.
One question for you. How are you going to think about the consumer versus the enterprise business?
Good question. In fact, I'll take a step back a little bit. So when I think about users of ChatGPT, actually, I think there's a number of users and there's a number of surfaces. So the users, I'd put in consumers. I think you'd put in companies. Actually, I think you'd also put governments, right? And even ChatGPT at OpenAI is kind of a platform itself. So I think there's both consumer users and corporate users. And I think corporate users are basically like larger consumer users, which are, and I see lots of companies doing this all the time, which is they are subscribing to ChatGPT as a platform so that their employees can be more productive, right? This is also an interesting use case for how GPT is used in surfaces, right? So obviously there's a web-based app, which everyone is familiar with, and there's a mobile app, which everyone's familiar with. There's also have a desktop app, which less people are familiar with, and there's also the APIs, right? So they have an API layer, and this is where companies are using it as well too, to use ChatGPT as a surface to make intelligent offerings, and we see things in everything from customer support to chatbots and things like that. So it's powering all sorts of use cases just around the circumference. So if I think about ChatGPT, I think about all of that usage. In fact, this leads to what I'll call a primary goal, which is around engagement, right? So we talked about 4 goals here: acquisition, engagement, monetization, quality. I'd actually put engagement kind of the top and most important thing. So let's actually break this down a little bit further, and we'll talk about actions and metrics at this point. So in the actions game, what I want to take a look at is what are the primary ways that people interact with this, and then we'll break it down into a number of metrics to really kind of geek out this product from a metrics perspective. So from an actions perspective, and this applies to, I think, consumers and businesses alike, right? They're going to visit the homepage, they're going to visit the app, they're going to download it. Step 1. Step 2, they're going to chat with it, right? They're going to start engaging with it. Step 3, they're going to have this chat experience. They're going to provide feedback, right? And from that, they might upgrade to the paid plan. They might say, "Oh, this is really great. I might start using the API." And then based on those outputs, they might also maybe share their output with friends or colleagues, or share through email or things like that. And then the last 2 actions I'm going to look at are really going back to our goal, but I want to look at more broadly, are on key metrics around quality and monetization, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail. Okay, so let's talk about monetization metrics. So again, since monetization is a really, really, really big part of this product, so I think the things we're going to look at are standard metrics like ARPU, and I think this product has a $20 subscription rate. I think it also has advanced rates for users as well too. And then corporate users are in a completely different bucket because they start using the API, and the API is kind of a per token type model. So we want to have a number of models where we're doing per user and also per token to basically see, which is really kind of almost a per query model, to see how we are monetizing. And then we want to take a look at conversion rates, which are converting free to paid, and then paid to corporate, and then paid to API, and corporate to API as well too. So there's a number of kind of mini conversion funnels getting people to use more and more. So monetization metrics, really important part of the equation. Also, as part of that, we might also have people who are churning out. People are like paying $20 a month and going, "Nah, I don't want to do it," or maybe they signed up for the API and then they're not really utilizing it. So we want to take a look at those users as part of our overall monetization ecosystem. Okay, so we talked about a lot of metrics. Big question now is, what's our North Star? What's the most important thing? So when I think about the stakeholders here, I think about consumers, I think about companies, I think governments are also involved and interested in this. I think OpenAI are certainly interested in this. What's everyone interested in? So I think consumers are interested in I want amazing AI responses, which are fast and inexpensive and useful. If I think about companies, I think they want the same thing. I want AI responses, which are fast and useful and and cost efficient, right? If I look at governments and stakeholders like that, I want to make sure that responses are safe and that safe things are happening, right? I think safety is a layer that probably borders the whole thing. And if I'm OpenAI, I also want to pave this world towards a safe, responsible arc towards AGI, right? That people are using it in a way that's useful and it benefits all of humanity. And it benefits all of humanity is also interesting to governments, which I think they have a vested interest in that. Not sure about consumers or companies, but I think certainly OpenAI and governments do. So based on all of those things, I think the one North Star that would kind of bring all these together is, and we talked about this concept of jobs completed. I think our best North Star here would be the number of jobs completed. And let me define that just arbitrarily as when we have a job, someone has an intent to use AI. And say for today, I have a specific intent. If I'm able to do that job, it's done. It might take me one query or two queries or three queries, right? But I really want to get that job done. So it's really about accomplishing jobs. And if I can accomplish that job more efficiently, better for the consumer, probably less expensive for OpenAI, because I don't want to spend them all day querying. It's just going to be very expensive, right? So I want to be able to help people get jobs done efficiently. And I know that if I can help people get jobs done efficiently, they're going to come back and do it again and again and again. And I think we want to use guardrails like things like safety and quality as a ways to make sure that we're doing the right jobs for the right people. So our North Star, number of jobs completed. And the last thing I want to talk about are a couple of countermetrics and maybe some downstream metrics.
Let's take a quick break to notice how Mark answered the question, but he was unfazed and quickly kept moving on. You need to keep a forward pace in your case there. For this North Star, I think it's interesting in that it's definitely getting towards what we want out of users. I'm just worried, how are we going to operationalize this? How are we going to measure this reliably and effectively in a way that, when the product team goes and talks to a researcher about some specific model, they're not going to get overly into the minutia about how this was defined?
That's a good question. So I think one, there's a lot of work from data science here. I think it's important for North Star to be fairly understandable in terms of number of jobs. Now, how we actually define jobs, we can probably break that down because you can also have a job which has specific intents. Let's say, like, I want to build a website, right? That's a big job, right? Which is going to have lots of little subtasks. So I think it's about defining, right, what's the level of subtask per session. And I think I'd work with data science to kind of figure out what's the right granularity of a job, I guess you could say, the right granularity of a task to be done. But I want to break it down so that it's like it's the right task size. It's not so big, like I want to build a website, which has got thousands of things, but it's also not so small so that every query counts against it, right? Because really what I want to develop is an efficient artificial intelligence system that when I ask it a question, it can give me a reasonably good answer that I think, like, wow, this is a great answer. And it may invite me to be like, I've got everything I need, or it may invite me to explore more based upon this information. So I think in terms of, what's the right fidelity, I think this is something that we really need to work on with the data scientist team to figure out what that right fidelity is. But I think the high level job of getting the number of jobs done, I think it's the right high level metric to focus on. I think the company can get around that. Okay, so marching forward a little bit here on countermetrics. So if our key metric is jobs to be done, I'd say actually a key countermetric is jobs not done, right? Imagine people coming going, I couldn't get it to do the thing I wanted to do it. I give up, right? This is not on the path to AGI. Clear countermetric for us. Also, I think some other good countermetrics overall for us are things like latency or API error rates, right? We've all had scenarios where we're using this and typing questions along and it's just like I'm full. I can't answer. I'm busy, right? These things are all countermetrics on our arc towards HEI. And then also, I think thumbs down rates, hallucination rates are. I think those are also great metrics to use as countermetrics to understand the overall quality of the product. So we've got good guardrails to make sure we're getting the jobs done, we're doing it fast, we're doing it high quality, we're doing it in all these ways. And then the last thing I'll take a look at here is downstream metrics, which is what happens, right, if people are using this product downstream. What's the consequence of this? So I think big consequences of using this product are obviously the funnels that we talked a little bit about, right? So going from a user to a subscriber to a corporate user to using API for downstream companies, right? Those are all great downstream metrics to look at. Also, I think extensions into the ecosystem, right? So third-party apps and API calls, things like that. And then really kind of enterprise adoption across the industries in general, right? Using this. I think those are all, going from AI today to much broader applications with third-party developers and companies. I think there's a lot of ways we can measure this on a downstream basis. Okay, so what have we done today? Just a quick summary of where we've been. We said, hey, how would we measure ChatGPT-5? And what we did was we came up with a mission statement for what we want ChatGPT to do. We created a set of goals across acquisition, engagement, quality, and monetization. We walked through, kind of the user journey from querying to responding to answering to sharing and all these kinds of things and a bunch of metrics on that. And we ended up with a really solid North Star goal on jobs done, which I think would be a great way to measure ChatGPT-5, as well as some downstream and counter metrics. Okay, let's wrap it up there. What kind of trade-off questions do we have?
Notice again how Mark just answered the question and moved on. He didn't over
Actually, I
fixate
want to
on the
push you a
question.
little bit more on the North Star. Let's say
One of the things that's happened in OpenAI actually is that we've really gotten a preference for more, I would say, harder metrics. And we specifically want to look at kind of like CFO level metrics. How would you define kind of a CFO level North Star metric for GPT-5's launch?
So a CFO, if I'm a CFO metric, um, putting on my CFO hat, which I don't play one on TV, putting on my CFO hat is I want to build a financially sustainable company, right? So on a CFO hat, I'm looking at what are my costs of all this infrastructure, right? I've got servers and usage and energy utilization and things like that. So let's say I've got $1 billion in costs, right? And then I've got the revenue side of the equation, which is what are all the revenues coming in? And that's from API calls, it's from subscriptions, things like that. And obviously, I want to make sure my revenue is greater than my cost. Otherwise, as a CFO, I am making a long-term investment in a short-term company. So I want to make sure from a CFO perspective that my revenues, my gross margins are financially sustainable. I would probably break that down on a per query basis, which is across the services. You take that $1 billion. If I've got 1 billion queries, that means it's $1 per query, and it's definitely not that, right? And then I look at from a cost perspective, and I look at my revenue perspective. I'm going to look at my users, what their average utilization rate is, and how much they're costing us consuming, and how much we're doing. So I want to basically make sure that our marginal query costs versus all our sunk costs align, so that I have a sustainable business moving forward in the future, right? So that I want to know that I can continue scaling my business as I add that next 10 million users, the next 100 million users, that it's actually going to increase the monetization of my company and not make it go the other way.
So this is really interesting. Mark went back to stakeholders. Originally, that was earlier on in his framework, but responding to the flow of the interview, he decided to pull that back in before he chose his North Star metric. It's a really good idea to reorganize your framework
loved
as
it.
needed
Loved your
on the
response. Love
fly.
how you also
Kept a forward momentum going, which I think a lot of people struggle with doing. After somebody asks a question, kind of like getting zoned in on that question, even letting that question take 5 or 6 minutes, but just continuing to move forward. And Having that balance of enough pausing, but then also sticking to your framework. And it was interesting how stakeholders, I think it was originally meant to come before actions and metrics, but you kind of adapted to the questions I answered and you brought it in before North Star metrics. So I thought that was also really clever. All right, and here's my analysis of your interview that you did, Mark. I think that what you could have done even better is a couple of different things. The first is have a little bit more on the AI eval style metrics. I think you really stuck to product metrics, but didn't necessarily get into AI evals. The second thing you could have done better is have more responsiveness to some of my interview questions. For instance, when I talked about the API or when I talked about having a less fuzzy metric, I ultimately needed to come back to those things once more afterwards. It would be better if he could be even more responsive to those things and guess, okay, so here's how I'm going to think about it financially. Here's a less fuzzy version of the North Star if we really have to go for it. If you answer questions in that way where you have a backup, then people see how flexible you are in your thinking. And then a final thing that could have done even better is potentially a screen share of some sort so that we can really see as you follow along in your thinking. Mark is one of the most humble people about this. He's helped literally hundreds or thousands of people get interviews. If you haven't seen him on YouTube already, welcome to his YouTube back catalog. There's plenty more amazing things he has there as well if you want free resources. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next episode.